Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to part 3 of my series on Pot Limit Omaha here at TonyBet. So we've got a couple of tables up as before. The left-hand table is PLO 50, the right-hand table is PLO 25 and a little more short-handed. And we'll just continue with our strategy of playing reasonably value heavy and just looking to exploit opponents that play too wide a range and call down too wide. So the two people on the right hand table at the lower stakes are also playing in the 50 games. We're going to assume they are a little more on the reggish side. As we've seen, quite a lot of the players on this site are probably not of the standard that you would expect to see on sites with a bit more traffic and where the standard is generally a bit higher. And it's kind of evidenced by open limping under the gun in a PLO 50 game, which is not going to be something you see on many sites. So an incentive to maybe jump into the action, play some softer opponents and attempt to boost that win rate, and 80% rate back is probably going to help that as well. The two can very much work in tandem. So, as before, we're just going to be continuing to look for exciting spots, talk through our thought processes, and yeah, just hopefully try and produce a reasonably exciting and entertaining and educational video. The fact that Armo, who we played in the previous video, who's playing 10, is playing 50, suggests a bit of a jump up in stake, and he has posted, which is almost certainly going to be a mistake long term. Opening the button with a very, very pretty hand on the right-hand table, we're going to be calling just about every 3-bet. Barring it going 3-bet, 4-bet is pretty much the only instance I can imagine us folding. We flop a pair and a wrap straight draw. We are going to be betting here, given that this flop is going to hit our range considerably more than our opponents. And I think checking the jack is going to allow him to potentially bluff us off on bricks, which is not something we're a massive fan of. We're okay with the call. We're not heartbroken by fold. The raise is pretty much the only result we are particularly annoyed about. We turn 2-pair and the straight. So we have redraws to the full house. The flush has obviously come in. So I'm going to check back and look to bluff catch on river. And we're going to be opening on the right-hand table. I think we just check on the right-hand table. There's certainly an argument for going for value, but I really don't see many hands that can call us that are worse than ours. And he has a weak flush draw. And we're pretty much giving up on this board. It's not doing particularly well. He is going to... I have a note on him that says he calls down particularly light, so I don't think bluffing that kind of opponent is necessarily going to be a fantastic idea on my part. Interesting defend. Going to be folding the left-hand table. Cut off and button, it's certainly an open, but I think in a later position it's not going to be quite strong enough. And this is a board that's going to hit a caller's range significantly more frequently than mine, and with just a gut shot we're going to be checking and check folding it. If we happen to find a situation where it goes check check, we can realize equity on some turns and rivers. But as is, we're just going to be folding. Going to be folding the button with the raggy jack. Get a walk. And opening the suited ace with some low connectors. Limping on the left-hand table again. Probably telling us it's a reasonably soft table. That being said, my hand plays so poorly multi-way that we are just going to be checking through and trying to realize equity. Betting our 2-pair here in a spot where I'm quite happy to pick it up. We have some redraws if need be. Queen is reasonably disconnected to the board. It's somewhat of a brick, barring something along the lines of Queen 5, Queen 7. So we are going to bet again and evaluate what our opponent does. Pretty much every draw has missed, namely 8-6, spades, ace four deuce, those kind of draws. And my opponent's playing pretty passive here. We have river to boat, it's not the strongest boat. We're going to try and get called by a hand like queen 7, queen 5, potentially a slow played straight, although I don't really think that really exists in his range. We do just pick it up. There is potentially a case for checking there, but I think it's very player dependent and requires a read that our opponent's going to turn a lot of busted draws or weak made hands into bluffs. And against someone that you play fairly frequently, they have a history with, then that's certainly a play you can make. But against someone that I don't think I've ever played before, and if I have played before, it was a very long time ago, I don't think I have the required information to make that play. Going to be checking back when we totally miss on the right-hand table. And I'm going to be peeling 1. Even though our opponent's only got 50 big blinds, I think peeling 1 is fine here. Another player joins. With just the better Jack-10 here, I'm actually going to be folding, given the presence of diamonds. On a rainbow board, I'd be considerably more incentivized to call. Get a walk with deuces. That's not exactly the worst result I could have had. Getting 3-bet by demolition. If he's 3-betting off the big blind, I'm going to suggest that he's probably on the stronger side of his range, namely aces and kings. The standard is going to play reasonably well versus aces and kings. Somewhat surprised that Armo has folded, but with a hand that flops pretty well. Doesn't really lose much equity versus aces, whether it's a single raise or 3-bet pot. We are going to be calling. At least this flop is relatively straightforward to play. It's also a flop that completely crushes his range, so it's quite difficult for him to get value. That sizing seems ridiculously large, given that he absolutely crushes my range, but sure. So there were a number of flops on the left-hand table that could have helped us there. We're going to have somewhere between 40 to 43% equity against aces. Depending on what suits he has and what combos he has. I mean, it's also somewhat dependent on what blockers he has, but in general, we're going to have something around that kind of equity. We need 2 to 1 to call, and we have a hand that flops particularly well, that has good flop equity distribution. Unfortunately, we get one of the flops where it just completely misses, but if there is a hand to call pre-flop to then call a 3-bet, that kind of hand, the mid-connected rundown is definitely going to be the hand to do that with. In essence, by calling, if we fold, we're going to lose 3.5 big blinds, which is going to be 350 big blinds per 100. So by calling, I'm not necessarily saying it's a winning play. I'm just saying it's more of a winning play than losing 350 big blinds per 100, which is probably the best way to think about it. And I think calling a hand like that, we're going to be losing something around 100 to 120 big blinds per 100, which against a loss of 350 big blinds per 100 is a significant difference. So does justify the call. And having position there is pretty vital as well. The 10s, we're going to be smoothing a button open. We're going to be 3-betting a small blind open. This is pretty much the only scenario in which I fold. It's not going to play particularly well versus a 3-bet range, and he short stacked, lowering the stack to pot ratio, meaning I have to hit, as I micro adjust my table, apologies, basically meaning I have to basically hit flop. I'm not going to have any turn or river possibilities just because he's got an SPR of about 1.5, so it's not going to, it basically means I have to absolutely crush the flop to continue in any way, shape or form. It's a very loose call of a 3-bet there. I mean, he is double suited, but that's just about the only positive I can think about. Armo, when he 3-bets, is just going to show up with so many aces and kings, and when you have a pair, you're just doing fairly terribly when your opponent has a higher pair. And he actually had one of the suits covered as well. We fold on the 4s. I'm actually going to be folding the nines out of position as well. Although it is interesting to note that Morana's on both of our tables and is playing not necessarily loose because it's definitely a button open, but is calling 3-bets fairly loose. So going through a bit of a situation where we're a little card dead. That can obviously happen whenever I kind of try to record a video. I can never really predict that I'm going to be dealt really interesting spots consistently. But as I touched on the previous video, there's no real need to kind of start chasing hands, overplaying ranges, or anything along those lines. Just stay patient, wait for spots to come to us, and exploit them when they present themselves. Going to fold the left-hand table. In a four-handed game, this is going to be an acceptable open under the gun, given double-suited. Single-suited, it's not going to be quite strong enough, but double-suited, it's going to fit the bill. It does lose a significant amount of equity when we 3-bet, just because 3-bets are typically going to contain either aces or ace-x combos that are going to have higher kickers than mine. Backdoor flush draw and a gut shot. I'm going to try and get this through with 1-bet. If we get called, we're probably shutting down on most turns. There are a few that can incentivize me to continue. Getting raised pretty much ends the hand. Especially if I'm playing someone like G1mer, I think that's how you say it, who is playing a style where he calls a lot. If a player's calling a lot, doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be raising a lot. So the raises that he makes are still going to be very nutted. It just means that he's moved a lot of hands from the fold part of range into the call part of range. He hasn't moved hands from the call part of range into the raising part of range. And that's an important distinction to make, because that will greatly affect how we play versus his perceived range. I think too often people see a lot of people playing a lot of hands passively, and then when they get raised, they just kind of fall into the mindset that their opponents play a lot of hands, so they can't have it. But they haven't really thought about an opponent playing a lot of hands, how he's playing them. If he's playing them very passively and then suddenly starts showing a lot of aggression, that's probably still going to mean that he is going to be on the stronger side of range. Might mean it's a little bit difficult to believe it, and you might not want to believe it, but it is still going to be true that he's going to show up with the nuts or pretty close to it most often. So something we're going to be pretty watchful of if we're playing very, very loose players that are playing very passively, calling a lot, that when they start raising is the time we start respecting their range. That being said, if we happen to be top of range when they start raising, we're just going to be high-fiving everyone to the bank, so it works both ways. Going to be opening the double-suited hand on the right-hand table. Broadway, connectivity, double-suited. Pretty much got everything going for it, barring the presence of an ace. I'm going to be calling a 3-bet. Flops pretty well. It's also towards the top of my range as well. For a hand that's that pretty, it's flopped pretty terribly. My opponent goes big. He's going to have a lot of ace-x. I flopped purely a gut shot on a backdoor flush draw, so we're just going to find a better spot. Double-suited sixes, likewise. Don't play particularly well post-flop, and certainly don't play well out of position. If the last hand was pretty, this is even prettier. So we are going to be 3-betting our double-suited aces. Potentially 4-betting if we get the opportunity, but sadly we do not. So we're going to be 3-betting, looking to lower the stacked pot ratio in our favor. We actually flopped pretty damn well. 2-pair in the NFD, some backdoor straight possibilities as well. We're just going to be getting this in. Even if he shows us King Jack, we're not actually doing that terribly. If he shows us weaker flush draws, etc., we're doing all right. That being said, that's basically the worst turn card in the deck for us, so we are going to be most likely check calling this turn. He is going to have a lot of Jack-X combos, although not necessarily all of them. When he checks back, it's somewhat curious. Our choices are either to check and attempt to bluff catch. Occasionally we are up against better 2 pairs, namely probably King Queen and King 10, or we can block a bet. Actually, I'm probably in favour of the checking line. And we have the best hand anyway, which is a fairly reasonable result for us. Unfortunately, my webcam is right over where the hand history button is, and moving it makes editing an absolute pain in the neck for me. So I am going to make a note of what the hand was and drop it in the comment section below as to what he showed up with in that spot. That's going to be a lot easier than me trying to fiddle around and editing every 10 seconds of the video to move the webcam back into the original position. So apologies, but go and look at the comment section and I will have put what hand he had within a day or so of this video coming out. Going to be just taking showdown here. My opponent can still be checking some ace-x. Slightly less likely now, but we are going to bluff catching rivers. Just take showdown, that's fine. Backdoor nut flush draw gut shot and overpair on the left-hand table. I'm going to bet fairly small here. I really don't need to go big. Conceivably, my opponent can have some draws, can have jacks, can have queens. At a pair much smaller than tens, I wouldn't be betting. Without the backdoor outs, we'd also wouldn't be betting, but we are just going to bet. We're fine with picking it up. My opponent does seem to like to call down pretty light, so we're going to try and take advantage of that as well. Check back the turn, which doesn't really help us. And check river, take showdown. And he showed up with the flush draw, turn the queen. It's pretty reasonable. Going to be 3-betting on the right-hand table with a fairly pretty hand in a 4-handed game. Only minor concern is I don't have the ace-high flush, I have the king-high flush. But that is not so significant in the 3-bet spot as it is in a single raise spot, given we're lowering the SPR pre. For our opponent 4-bets, we are going to put him squarely on aces and kings, which this hand is doing spectacularly poorly versus, and we will be folding. I have tempted fate by mentioning that, but it still makes this a fairly reasonable fold. Hands that contain aces and kings are just going to lose so much equity versus ace-ace XX and king-king XX. So I don't expect a 4-bet range to be much other than that. So we're going to make a tie fold, but a correct one. And kind of realizing how our hand interacts with 3-bet and 4-bet ranges is absolutely essential. The pre-flop aspect of Pot Limit Omaha is something that is probably least understood. Hence we see people making a lot of big mistakes pre-flop, overplaying big but not spectacularly fantastic pairs, namely jacks, queens, and weak kings. So understanding how our equity is going to be affected versus a standard 3-bet, 4-bet range, whether we plug it into a simulator as like 5% or a 4-bet range is 2.5%, something around those lines, and then just like running simulations on hands such as that, or such as the previous one, apologies, then we're going to see just how dramatically poor our equity is. Once we get 4-bet. And there is also the problem that we're not really sure where we are if we flop an ace or a king. Conceivably, if our opponent has king king XX, then the ace is live. But if we hit the ace and our opponent continues, do we always have to put him on aces, or do we put him on ace king? It just becomes an absolute real trouble spot and a real head scratcher. And as such, it's a spot just best avoided, really. I'm going to be opening the button with the connected queen. We have a suit. Hand works in unison together. Demolition 3-bets. The hand plays pretty well versus 3-bets. I've said that a few times. Hopefully we actually flop one this time, but it's most certainly a call. 4-betting is turning the hand into a bluff, so we won't dream of doing that. Slight problem. We have a pair, we have open ender, backdoor flush draw. We're doing pretty poorly versus aces. Doing okay against everything else. Demolition checks, we're going to check back. When he bets this sizing, we're getting 3-1. Does justify the call. So it is a call I shall make. Whoa. I don't for a minute assume I'm ever ahead here, and in fact I'm not. But I am getting 3.5 to 1 with an open ender. So as frustrating as this is a call off. We just hope that our opponent hasn't jammed like King Queen Jack, which is kind of disastrous for us. But sure. Opponent has aces. Jack 10 9. Unfortunately, the Jack 8 got there. He jammed a worse straight with 2 pair. Against those exact hands, it's a reasonable stack off. It's not what I wanted to make, but once our opponent jams here, which against an opponent's 3-bet and continued is likely against aces, which is a mistake. His jam is a mistake, but once we're getting that good of a price, we just have to go with it, unfortunately. Get an opportunity to 4-bet aces, so that's what I should do. Going to be checking our weak flush draw pair and straight out in a limp spot. The benefit of losing the previous pot on the right-hand table is it does mean that it looks like we're tilting. We are just going to be getting it in. Going to be turning the run it twice off. Opponent also has aces. Apparently I didn't turn the run it twice off in time. Ay, 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 really? Come on, be fair. Ah, sigh. Running well today. Needless to say, getting it in with aces pre-flop in a Pot Limit Omaha game is rarely going to be a mistake. Just an unfortunate result. It will happen. It is a game of reasonable highs and lows. I'm going to be 3-betting my aces again. And when we flop the ace and the NFD, we are going to be betting, even on a low flop like this. We do actually have a 6 blocker to block some of the straights, which is reasonably good for us. Is a board that favours him more than me. That being said, we just have too much equity here, so we are going to be going with it for 100 big blinds. Left-hand table, we haven't had many hands recently. That trend continues with the weak jack. New table, new player on the table on the right-hand table. So more people that add to the table, the sort of tighter we have to play. Different dynamic that is being added. The Jack 10 8 7. If the I was about to say if it was a Jack high flush, you'd probably open, then that would be the case under the gun. But I think under the gun +1, this is a reasonable open. I think under the gun it's just a tad too weak, and we want the Jack high flush. But UTG +1, it seems reasonable. It does also defend reasonably well versus a 3-bet. And it should be noted, anytime we don't have an ace or a king blocker, we're going to be 3-bet that more frequently, just because our opponent is more likely to have aces and kings. So that is something we do have to bear in mind. But it still plays well enough to defend the 3-bet. Not a massive fan of this bet. I'm going to call once. Try and turn a 2-pair, try and turn an out. Not quite what I had in mind. If he bets again, I unfortunately have to fold. I think my opponent pots here. He's going to have King X and not much else, and my opponent jams, we just fold. Somewhat frustrating. There is certainly an argument for folding flop when we just flop the 8, but I do think he is the kind of player that's overplaying ranges a little bit, so I was going with any 2-pair that we happen to turn, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. I'm going to try and take the ace to showdown, not that I expect to win too frequently. Double suited threes aren't going to cut it on the right-hand table. And I think against 20 big blinds, we're just going to get queens in. Showed up with a bit of a funky hand previously, so I guess we just go with it. The fact he calls really doesn't tell me that he's particularly strong here. We have an SPR of 1, so we're just going with it. But the call pre, it would appear to be just a very basic ship fold spot pre, and he somehow managed to find a call, which is, I mean, I guess it's a thing, but it really indicates, one, that he has a weak hand. If he's not willing to get the money in that spot, he really shouldn't be calling. And it does kind of embolden me to sort of barrel off on low flops like that. Flopping the nizzles, unfortunately we don't have a redraw, but we are going to be continuing. Sorry, we have a redraw to the ace queen, but we don't have a redraw in terms of terms of flushes, which our opponent can have. King queen got there. We do block it to an extent. I'm going to be betting as if I have the nuts until I'm told otherwise. Can still get value off some two pairs, off some flushes. Not the run out I was particularly enjoying. I guess we have to check fold it. He's going to have a lot of king X here. The pot size bet is just so polarized and so heavily nutted. If you ever find yourself in a spot like this and you're going for value, this is not the way to get value. I'm going to fold second nuts quite happily, and I can count on the fingers one hand the number of times that's going to be a bluff. Somewhat of an annoying run out, but it's going to be more annoying for us to call off, see the nuts, and have made a mistake there. So as much as the run out is annoying, we can't be results orientated in that instance. Played it absolutely fine. Again, a hand that flops well versus a 3-bet. Again, just about every time I say that, we're flopping poorly. But it does flop well versus 3-bets. Going to check my gut shot and backdoor flush draw. Nuts. That's always nice. Unfortunately, I don't actually think my opponent has anything, which is kind of annoying and tilting. I think my opponent, when he's checking, is probably going to have a lot of kings. That being said, we are going to go for value. It's pretty much the only way to play it. Well, of the rivers, we didn't want to see a heart. Heart does make sense in the check call range. Nice answer. Unfortunately, the nature of Pot Limit Omaha is sometimes the runouts are not going to be our friend, and I think it's probably fair to say that that is the instance that we find ourselves in. I seem to remember when I did the first 4-part series on TonyBet, we ran pretty atrociously in the third video of that as well, so maybe I'm just setting a trend. Maybe it's a thing. But yeah, the decisions we made, I think, are absolutely fine. Happy with the way we've played the hand, just slightly unhappy with the results. The Queen-Jack hand, absolutely fine for us to get it in. Given the price we're getting, aces, obviously standard, get it in. Betting the nuts when we have the nuts and folding when we are drawn out on is absolutely fine. You know, dream scenario is we don't get drawn out on, but hey-ho, things can happen. Get min 3-bet. Not really sure why he's 3-betting any small size. Kind of means my 4-bet's a bit small, but we're still going to make it. We're actually going to size down. We've just crushed this board so hard. Try and see if we can get an ace-x to spaz out. See if we can get a weak flush draw to decide to stack off. Maybe 5-6 can go nuts. Unfortunately, we don't get any value there. At least I got aces to hold though, so there's a positive. And I think that's probably going to cover it for this video. Coming up to the half-an-hour mark. We're just going to play this last hand, which, spoiler alert, unless we're limped on, we are going to be folding, given it's fairly rubbish. So yeah, as before, any questions, comments, feedback, leave it in the comment section below. And we will just play this last hand out. And we win. So small mercy compared to the rest of the session. Apparently I can't hit sit out next hand. Yeah, so one last open, which is entirely reasonable, blind versus blind. Guinness, I think that's how you pronounce it. Did 3-bet us the previous time, so we'll see how it goes. It's a flop that's going to favour my range more than his. I'm going to have considerably more ace-x's than him. I do have a 5 blocker. I'm going to bet once. He snap calls, and that pretty much ends my interest in this hand. I mean, I do have a 5 blocker here, but I still don't think that bluffing people on a soft site that aren't necessarily inclined to fold is not really going to show me a profit, so pretty easy fold. So yeah, as before, leave questions, comments, and feedback. And I have been Tom for pokervip.com, and I hope I will see you for part 4.